Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Pelican Brief Weekly. I'm Murray Rundus, very happy to be joined by Brian McCall. How have you been, Brian?
I've been doing really well, and I have to commend you for your work getting the Pelican Brief Daily out. I've been looking at those every morning. If you haven't seen them yet, if you enjoy this show, you get a little sort of news headlines for the day, kind of what's going on to keep you in touch in between these longer broadcasts.
Yeah, we have so much good content. I have to commend you for your great work over at the professor's exam and window on the arena. There's a lot of stuff going on here at Pelican. And I also want to introduce many of the people that might be watching the show for the first time, as this is the once a month free segment that we do over on YouTube. If you want to see the full content that we have over here on Pelican, that's Pelican Brief Daily, Brian's show with Chris Ferrara, and the Pelican Brief Weekly every week, you can go over to Pelican Plus. It's the link that is in the description. You can become a member today, support some great Catholic creators, and more. But Brian, can you tell us what do we have for our stories today?
So the big story that I'm sure is on everyone's mind is Iran. So we're going to talk about what's going on, but most importantly, talk about this from a Catholic perspective. What principles should we be using to evaluate this? That's going to be probably a lengthier discussion, but once we've gone through that, we're going to turn our eyes to Germany. And Germany has been brewing. I think I've said for some time. I think it's pretty much in de facto schism. I think they've deepened that schism even more. So we'll tell you a couple developments that happened this past week related to their further lurch to heresy and schism over there. Um, but then, we will also have for you our cultural recommendation.
Yeah, definitely. We have a lot of great stories, and as we mentioned, those two are really big stories that we want to dive in deeper in because it's something that's affecting really all of church and state. Now, when it comes to the saints and the liturgy for this week, a big saint that's going to pop up on everybody's calendar is Saint Thomas Aquinas, the angelic doctor. This is something that's very near and dear to traditional Catholics. It's something that in traditional seminaries, it's always the predominant teacher of the seminary is really Saint Thomas. You find that throughout, and that's because the popes, especially since Pope Leo XIII, has have really doubled down on the fact that Saint Thomas Aquinas should be the model for theology and his great Thomistic theology. And why was this? Why was Saint Thomas such a big deal? The first thing, and I think this is how we really start with understanding him, is because of his virtue and moral excellence in and of himself. This is something that gets ignored oftentimes, but St. Thomas was a master not only of of sort of highbrow metaphysics, even though he was the master at that, but he also understood ascetic theology and the great mysticism of the church extremely well, which was the window by which he looked into the rest of his masterworks of theology and philosophy. What made St. Thomas so good is by carrying on what came before him. He decided to look not only at the fonts of revelation, looking at Saint Augustine's understanding of it, looking at Holy Scripture, understanding Holy Scripture, memorizing much of Holy Scripture, but also reconciling that with reason, with reconciling Aristotle especially, and also Plato and some of the Platonic thought with revelation. Theology, philosophy at the time had really fallen into a moment of decadence. It had fallen into a moment where there was a lack of reason and method and the way of going about things that hadn't really been fleshed out as much as it needed to. St. Thomas provided the systematic theology that the church really needed at the time. Gave us an amazing saint in order to bring that way of thought into the church, reconciling both faith and reason, which is something we carry forth to this day. So, an amazing saint. We should ask for his prayers. Anybody who's studying anything, anybody who's wanting to find balance and understanding for the church today, we have to ask for the intercession of St. Thomas Aquinas.
Let's be honest. Social media platforms are not made with Catholics in mind. They are designed to draw you into an endless cycle of doom scrolling and despair. Pelican Plus is an app made for tradition loving Catholics. It has all the prayers you need read by real people. You can watch uninterrupted shows from your favorite Catholic creators and read top of the line articles from Dr. Peter Kwasniewski. You can also stay up to date on the latest news with the Pelican Brief. So join the movement of traditional Catholics against big tech by becoming a member of Pelican Plus today.
Definitely, and his feast day is the day he died, March 7th, but if you're over at the Novus Ordo, you'll see him pop up in a random day in January. Just another one of those just strange changes. But if you're a college student, maybe listening to this, my son's had this experience. You're in class, and there's this annoying person that just keeps talking and interrupting, and they're like thinks they're so intelligent, says lots of things because they think the more they say, the smarter they look. Just remember this story about St. Thomas Aquinas. When he was in St. Albert the Great's class, he sat there, didn't say a word. And so the students thought he was dumb because he didn't say anything. So they started calling him the dumb ox because he was a little rotund. But St. Albert knew how brilliant he was. He says that ox will bellow through all of Europe, and so just remember that the loudest person isn't always the most educated person. But I actually have another saint that I chose for today, particularly because I knew we were talking about Germany, and she also is a good inspiration for any of our female viewers. That is Saint Kunigunda, who is feast day is the day that we're recording this, March the 3rd. Saint Kunigunda is the wife of the Emperor Henry the First, hence the German connection, and she was a holy wife. They didn't have any children because they were both very holy to do this. They had basically sworn a vow of chastity, so they had a marriage like the Blessed Mother and Saint Joseph, which is very extraordinary in history. You need a lot of spiritual directors approval for that. But she lived a holy life, great works of charity. After Henry the Emperor died, she became a nun, and then great stories of miracles following her life. So, as Germany, as we said, is sort of in this real theological, doctrinal, praxis, liturgical, I guess everything mess. Pray to their former queen, Queen Kunigunda, for them to get back on the right track.
Amen to that. Yeah, we need a lot of saintly intercessions, I think, in order to fix the German church, so we can take whatever we can get. Um, moving on to our first story. This is something that has really rocked the world. It's something that we saw coming. If you look back on even the some of the Pelican Brief weekly videos and clips that we've done here, we knew that there was going to be an escalation, and that is, of course, the strikes that were conducted against Iran. It started last Saturday. This was something where there was initial reports that there was explosions, there was attacks on military sites, rocket sites, but also just technological sites as well. And very shortly after that, we had an announcement from President Trump that the United States was going to war with Iran, that there was going to be these conducted strikes with Iran, which we get into later. It seems like we always have to bring it up with Venezuela and everything as well. The War Powers Act that always becomes such a controversial thing. We'll get into that soon as well. That's something Trump will have to face. But when it comes to the actual attacks themselves, it was very quickly understood and announced that the Ayatollah Khamenei had died in one of these strikes, along with much of the command apparatus of the Iranian regime. So at the moment, it's really I don't want to necessarily say a power struggle because they do have a line in place for who they go to next. It looks like the Ayatollah's son might actually be the one next up, but people are falling left and right. A lot of their command is simply falling apart due to the devastation of these strikes. Very shortly after that, as well, we reported this on the Pelican Brief Daily. The Israelis moved on southern Lebanon, where they were making attacks against Hezbollah. Hezbollah is, of course, the militia group that is oftentimes seen as the proxy network in Lebanon for the Iranians, for the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard in Iran, and it's a Shiite militia group. And it's something that ever since October 7th in 2023, the Israelis were able to really decapitate, attack with all kinds of intelligence operations, military operations, and they have even invaded large parts of southern Lebanon. At the moment, there is a continued strike against Iran. The president announced that this could go up to 4 weeks. It could take a month. You could even go longer than that. Really, it's something that we just don't. don't know at the moment. There have been U.S. servicemen that have died already, especially in an attack on Kuwait that was made, where I believe 4 American servicemen died there. It was announced this morning. We saw the footage from many places in the Middle East that have been struck by various drone attacks. I believe one in Dubai, the consulate there, was recently attacked as well with an explosion. And it's going to be a nonstop back and forth. A couple other developments that I want to go into. Uh, the Pahlavi, or the former Shah in Iran, his successor, he's been kind of distanced. The president has distanced himself from him. There was a press briefing today where it was asked what the president thought of Pahlavi possibly moving in. That was something Trump distanced himself from. He seems to want somebody in Iran if there's going to be regime change, which it seems like that's Trump. Trump is simply assuming that at the moment, that that's what they're going for. He said that he would like to see somebody within Iran that is less radical than the regime currently in place. Few other things that were interesting. Secretary Marco Rubio, when he was questioned about this, he did give a very, it was a breath of fresh air in the sense that it was very methodical in how he gave this answer. It was very coherent. It's going to be controversial exactly what he said, which was that the reason for the United States going into this conflict and making this strike was that it was a preventative strike, trying to prevent the Iranians from striking first. But what he really said that was quite controversial, quite interesting, was that the strike was made because it was sort of assumed that the Israelis would act in a certain way. So what many saw that as is that this was Israel dragging the United States into yet another war into the Middle East. In order to kind of get the final bit of background on this, I think it is necessary to see about just a little bit of backstory as to why exactly this is happening, which is really the history that needs to be looked at is actually the history of Israel. When Israel was established as an independent sovereign state in the Middle East, it immediately turned the Arab and the Islamic world against them. It's something that Israel has been constantly vying for power and influence in the Middle East, and it's something they've had the United States' backing for quite some time, due to both the Israeli lobby, but also because of the American evangelical Christian Zionist lobby as well, or the Christian Zionist interest groups within this country. It's something where Israel managed to fight back a coalition of the Syrians and the Egyptians, along with many other Arabs joining against them. And really, that brings us up to even though it's a constant struggle for them moving in occupations against the Palestinian state, moving into what you can people can look at the clean break memo, which was the large long term plan for the Israelis in order to gain influence in what they saw as security in the Middle East. And in order for them to do that, they needed to destabilize the Iraqi regime at the time, Syria, these militia groups in Lebanon, along and really make friendly sort of puppet states throughout the Middle East. When people speak of, and they can often speak of this in a weird way, the Greater Israel Project, that's oftentimes what they're referring to, is this desire for Israel to have a complete influence over that area in the Middle East, so in their minds they can have complete security. The final piece of this puzzle, however, was the Iranians. The Iranians are different from the rest in terms that they are Shiite, so they're a different kind of Muslim. They're not the typical Muslims that you find are what's called Sunni Muslims. These are a different kind, sort of like Protestant and Catholic Shiite Muslims, they're called. And this group was or this faction that has taken control over Iran after they overthrew the Shah, which was the monarchy there in Iran. Um, they were funding many of these militia groups throughout the Middle East, and in recent years they've been trying to develop a nuclear program in many major nuclear facilities, research facilities. What you've probably heard of Natanz, of Fordow, these major nuclear facilities. And of course, and at the end of last year, the United States struck those nuclear facilities after there was no agreement that could really be reached, after the Iranians and the Israelis were striking each other due to an escalation in the conflict, both in Palestine but also with each other. And that leaves us to this point where the United States feels like it needs to bring in the killing blow, both for their interests, it seems, with Israel, but also For other reasons that the United States wants to have a better influence in that region. I think it's undeniable that Israel plays a major role in that region. How people interpret that will simply just be where they're coming from both a theological or a broader political perspective. So that sort of gives us the groundwork there, Brian, even though there's a lot there to work with. I'm hoping you can give some insight in terms of how we view this as Catholics, how we view this from a just war angle, but also just your own personal thoughts on how this conflict is playing out and how you think it will play out in the future.
Are you looking for a daily dose of the Saints? Listen to the authentic 1894 version of Butler's Lives of the Saints, read by me, Timothy Flanders, each day on Pelican Plus. Get exclusive access to this content and more by becoming a Pelican Plus member today at the link below.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think it's tragic, and it's really really sad. From a Catholic perspective, for a war to be just, you first of all have to start with you have to have a just cause. So the cause has to be just what you're doing, and that's part of the problem here. Is yeah, you did a really good job laying out kind of the facts as we have them. But what is our objective? What is the United States like? When do you know the war is won? What's happened? Like, what is the event? What happens? Is really not very clear. Even though they keep saying we have clear objectives, when you really look at what they're saying, they're not very clear. And I think the real objective is what you alluded to. That is, Israel wants hegemony in the region. They want greater Israel. And Iran, I mean, Iran is a massive country. It's almost 100 million people. It's the size of basically the size of Western Europe, and they needed to bring them down. And I think Rubio and I think it was even Johnson confirmed this as well. That's what he heard. I mean, basically said, well, Israel was going to attack them anyway. And if they did, then our bases would be attacked in retaliation. So we had to get involved to disable some of their weapons to minimize our casualties. Wait, I thought this was our ally whom we fund to the tune of billions and billions of dollars, but they're saying, "Well, we're gonna start a fight and drag you into it, and we're not gonna listen to you." I mean, that's not a just cause right there. That is not a just reason. Now, the harder question is once they put you in that position, which I think we can get out of, we should have just said, no, we're cutting off all your money if you do this, and your weapons." I think, but that didn't happen. But once you get to the calculus that they're going to do this and put our people in danger, then it's a harder decision. I mean, do you try to disable some of their weapons before that? But these attacks were more than that. They were assassination attempts. Well, not attempts anymore. Successes. They assassinated not just their supreme leader, but also many, many government officials, leaders of the government. Um, and that's a real problem because there's, a sort of false moral principle. I've heard people say, like, well, once you go to war, just anything goes. All's fair in war. You just anything you do to win the war. And if we could decapitate these people and assassinate these leaders and kill them, that's good. Well, that has never been either a just reason for a war to assassinate, foreign leaders. We may not like those leaders. Uh, and number two, it's never been a just means of war, sort of to assassinate the civilian leaders. Now, obviously, if there's military people who are fighting in the war, I mean, they can get killed. But we're talking about, you know, civilian leaders of the country has never been a permissible means in war. Now, even though the United States has done it, that doesn't make it moral in the past. And so really, I think this got some serious problems on the just war theory. Also, as to your one about the one justification, but you don't really hear them talking about it since this started, the nuclear weapons. I just am having flashbacks of weapons of mass destruction and George Bush because where'd this claim come from? Benjamin Netanyahu, who has been claiming he's been crying wolf since I was in high school and college that any day now Israel's about to develop a nuclear weapon. Just next week they're going to have a nuclear weapon. Well, after 40 years, I don't believe you anymore. Like, maybe they are, but I'm not gonna believe it from you because you've been telling us that since the 1980s and 90s. And then wait, I thought we set them back. Remember this great success we had over the summer? Oh, they're set back now. They can't have nuclear weapons. So that I think is just a complete joke that's a reason. But we have this other we really the stated reason seems to be to destabilize the country, to assassinate their leaders. And aside from its moral just impermissibility as an end or a means, I want to put this in perspective from a practical standpoint of the chaos we may be creating in Iran. Now, the Iranian people's perspective, right now, again, I'm probably going to get accused of being liberal or fostering religious liberty. I'm not, right? Islam is a false religion. It is not, as John Paul II said, one of the world's great religions. There's only one, there's no world's great religions. There's one true religion and false religions. Islam is a false religion, teaches poisonous doctrines. Okay. But from the political perspective, from people in the country, they just assassinated their supreme leader, the equivalent of their pope from a Catholic perspective. Imagine if they dropped a bomb on the Vatican, the Muslims, and killed the pope. On top of that, today, Israel launched an attack on the building where their electors, their council who elects the next supreme leader, it was going to meet to elect the next leader. Now they got their timing off. They weren't there apparently at the time. But again, imagine if Islam attacked, killed the Pope, and then launched a bomb at the Sistine Chapel or a missile. Right? The outrage, well, maybe right in the 13th century, the outrage Catholics would have. Probably the Vatican today would apologize, to the Muslims for that. Say they're a religion of peace. But all right, in 1950, imagine how Catholics would react to that. That's the ire that we may be starting. We and our ally may be, creating here. I mean, that's the level of what they've just done. And this has not worked. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Whenever you take an immoral path to war, it's funny how it doesn't work out very well. This is, when are we going to learn our lesson? We killed Gaddafi. We killed Saddam Hussein. We got rid of Assad, and we've just created chaos and made things worse. So even if you thought there was a justifiable reason for this war, which again I haven't named one, that you can't do it if you're going to do more harm than good. And essentially, I think you have the biggest risk of destabilizing this massive country. And I don't see how this ends in 4 weeks. I mean, I really don't see how it ends because it's not a little. I mean, look how long Iraq took. It was half the size of this, and did not have the military and natural resources that Iran has. Um, I, look how long Afghanistan took. I just really worry we may be mired in an immoral, unjust war.
Yeah, the two things that pop out to me here are is because you mentioned the prospect of a ground war. And I think that is something that should be taken seriously because if you listen to Donald Trump, it doesn't sound like the Trump administration is telling him or that he's informed on as to the fact that that could be a possibility. And I think it very well could. Um, I don't, Trump seems to think that you could put in someone that is slightly less radical, maybe is still a part of of an Islamic republic there, and that will sort of just calm the waves. They can bring in some kind of liberalization, and that will just solve the problem, and it'll pacify them against Israel. I don't imagine that that's going to be the case. I actually think they're going to need to move on it, especially because of the nature of their religion. This is something that we even mentioned during Venezuela, how everything has a religious dimension to it. The reason why Venezuela went the way it did was because of the religious dimension. It's because of the it's because of the fact that they don't have a die-hard religion that they're dying for. It's not part of their culture. That's why you could just sweep over a nation like that. Iran is different because they're Shiite. And the Shiites, the core fundamental tenet of them, the core fundamental piece of their identity is the fact that they are the martyr Muslims. It's the fact that they are descended from Ali, the great Muslim martyr from ancient times, where he uh, d- d- um, was died in a martyr's death. They see the whole Shiite identity as being a part of that martyr identity, and they will fight to the death because of their religion. Now, is that the majority of them? No, I think you have many people there are not, theocratic Muslims. However, it is part of their identity, and there could be large pockets of the Iranian population. Let's say it's even 5, 10%. When you're dealing with a country with tens of millions of people, you're going to have major insurgencies that will be just impossible to wipe out. And now they're going to be radicalized. Something we didn't mention was the fact that the United States and Israel in a part of these attacks bombed an all-girls school over there. People say it's fake. I mean, for all of the information that we see, it seems to be a very real thing where you have massive casualties from the striking of an all-girls school in Iran. Um, that's not going to bode well for relations with Israel and the United States in the future, especially when a core fundamental part of their identity is martyrdom, is hatred of the United States, is hatred of Israel. I just don't see this going well. But we'll have close tabs on it. Keep an eye on it. For our Pelican members, you can check out the Pelican Brief Daily, the articles that we have out, or hear the Pelican Brief Weekly. We'll keep you updated.
Yes, well, obviously have to keep our eye on this and pray for a miracle, I think, to de-escalate this. Just last parting point, because as you mentioned about the different pockets, a lot of people in America don't know much about Iran. It's been a very mysterious country, but it is not a monolithic country. I mean, and people say it's just Persia. There are Persians there, but it is a larger state. And much like Iraq, when the strike happened, you saw Iraq break into these different ethnic and other factions. And there's a real chance that that could happen with Iran, and that hasn't been a good thing. I think the only person it's a good thing for is Israel, because if Iran is united, they are stronger. But if they are turned, inward on each other and different factions start to go at each other, it could be, a bigger quagmire. So we'll definitely keep you updated. Join Pelican and keep watching those Pelican brief dailies. Well, before we move on to our next story, it's time for our cultural recommendations. So, what do you have for us this week, Murray?
I hate ads. They are distracting, annoying, and oftentimes contain offensive, obscene content. Catholics shouldn't have to be bombarded by this. We are only one sideways glance away from impurity. The Pelican Plus app has no ads whatsoever, just pure content in a pure environment. Watch all of your favorite Catholic shows by becoming a Pelican Plus member today. Click the link below.
Yeah, this is something that I find really one of the great joys in life. I find is listening to Mozart's piano concertos. This is something I just think it's the best part of one of the best parts of classical music. It's something that I think a lot of people are familiar with the symphony. They might be familiar with piano recitals. They might be familiar even with the opera. The piano concerto, in a way, is a lost art, even though it's one of the more popular forms of classical music. For those who don't know, you'll have your typical classical symphony. However, in the front is a piano, which takes a sort of solo voice involved there. Back in Mozart's time, he would often conduct, and you'll sometimes see this with modern performances today as well, but he would conduct while also playing the piano, the main piano. So it's a fascinating, very virtuosic thing that somebody can do, and it's amazing to hear. My favorite one is his 22nd piano concerto. It's just a wow moment is hearing it. My favorite one is it's amazingly played by the pianist David Frey, who has a very unorthodox style of playing. He sort of uses a chair instead of using a bench, and he gets really into the playing. I think he does a great job interpreting this piece. It's quite fascinating. If you also want an interesting perspective on it as well, and you might, if you're maybe very familiar with classical music as it is, I would encourage you to try to listen to this piece as well when the piano is being played on a forte piano, People don't, I think, realize that Mozart's piano at the time would have looked a lot different than the one that we have today. It would have had where now we have white keys, it would have had black keys. The black keys that we have today on the modern piano would have been white. There would have been a much lower, a much smaller register. And in order to use the pedals, which is what makes the music sustain itself, you would actually use your knee. You'd bring your knee up in order to operate this the sustain on it. It was a fascinating instrument, and it does add a different bit of character, one that's more lighter, one that's less heavy than you hear on the modern piano, built for this great romantic sound of the Beethoven, the Schubert, the Chopin. It's something different. It has an airier sound. So maybe listen to David Frey's recording if you want to also look up Mozart's Piano Concerto 22 on forte piano. That's FORTE piano. It's really fascinating to listen to.
Well, it's funny, we don't coordinate this, but so many weeks it seems like we do. I was gonna speak about Mozart as well, and one of my favorite, choral pieces, the Exultate Jubilate. And I think we're in the midst of Lent, we're in the 2nd week, but we can look forward to that joyful music, the return of the joyful word that is suppressed during Lent, and, in maybe preparation for this, you can find a copy of this to listen to. It's a three-part, three-movement, piece, and it's so had such epitome of Mozart, complexity, but simplicity. It's a great complexity of themes that run through it, but as you listen to it, it's very light and seems very simple. My favorite recording is Decca put out. It's an album that's called Mozart Portraits. So it has a few other pieces, I think some arias from um, Don Giovanni and Figaro. But it has the very end, all three movements of the Exultate Jubilate with the mezzo soprano Cecilia Bartoli performing it. So just a really uplifting, beautiful piece.
Yeah, amazing recommendation. I love that piece too. So yeah, Mozart, a lot of Mozart for you to listen to at home. Yeah. Well, Brian, moving on to a different style of German, even though Mozart is
Yes,
so Austrian, but
this is the
there's some
German week.
chaos going on in the German church. Can you tell us what's going on?
Yeah. So the German church just had an election for a new leader for the German Bishops' Conference, which has been really the most radical, I think, force in what's left of European Catholicism. And they have sort of gone further down that route. They elected Bishop Heiner Wilmer to head up the German Bishops' Conference. He's relatively young for a bishop. He's 64, so he has, 11 years till he reaches that retirement age. He's the priest of the Order of the Sacred Heart, and he's been in the Diocese of Heddelsheim and has previously served in, has been a leader in the church. He was superior general of that religious order, for example. It really is significant because he really is seen as one of the major supporters of the controversial synodal way, which was, I mean, just a complete anti-Catholic. I mean, it's not even non-Catholic, just a complete overturning of the governance of the Catholic Church. It was essentially a parliament where they let some bishops in, and some priests, but it was, dominated by lay people, put forward radical anti-Catholic propositions, ordination of women and accepting of sodomy and all this just, I mean, just everything on the progressive liberal Catholic agenda. And really, everyone is saying who's looking at this that, his leadership will push this synodal way more. I mean, it got so bad. It was so liberal. It was even too much for Francis's Vatican. Now, they didn't really do very much, but they actually had to send a few letters saying, like, slow down. Whoa, stop. You're even getting ahead of me. And they had a little tension even with Francis's Vatican. So, if, they were too liberal for Francis's Vatican. I mean, what can I say? And he definitely was one of the major figures leading that just radical movement. That the idea and the fundamental theological flaw of this, which is frankly, I mean, has been supported by Francis's synod on synodality, is that theology is essentially a matter of democracy, and that we just need to get everybody together, all the special interest groups, and kind of vote on what our theology is. Francis does this under the guise of a listening church, but that's not how revelation works. And Roberto Mattei is doing a really good job explaining this. It's a misuse of the sensus fidei, which is really a defensive theological principle, right? That when crazy novel things come up, the sensus fidei is like, "Whoa, stop! That's not Catholic." It is never something that advances new ideas. It is a conservative force that is non-magisterial, but it's just the sense that Catholics know when there's something rotten in the state of the Vatican. But to paraphrase Shakespeare, but in any event, this is, I think, marks a continual veering into a Protestant Lutheran congregational model of church government, which will bring about further, push for radical theological change. We already see the synodal way is at it again. They've now made a request to Rome for lay preachers, to have lay preachers. Now, some people maybe think, oh, what's that? I'm not surprised about that. I mean, this has been an abuse in the conciliar church for a long time. Handing over the pulpit to lay preachers is not something unheard of, but again, as um, uh, Helena Belloc said, it's much worse to live in a country where the evil or bad things are sanctioned by law and institutionalized, as opposed to a country where they're forbidden, but they just happen anyway, right? So even if there have been these abuses, to sort of formalize it makes it even worse. Now, am I just an old curmudgeon? Why can't lay people preach? Well, because it is one of the unique gifts of the ordained priesthood. It is one of the munera of the ordained priesthood. Priesthood is to sanctify. So just like lay people cannot confect sacraments, forgive sins, anoint, right? They cannot preach. In preaching is not just can lay people explain things, can they debate, can they teach? Obviously. But preaching from the sanctuary is an official act of the church, is teaching as a representative of the church. And that gift of preaching, of teaching, is only to the ordained. So this is really an attack on the theology of the sacred priesthood to tolerate or even institutionalize such an abuse. This is not looking good in Germany. I think a lot of people are saying the consecration of the bishops of the Society of St. Pius X is the big challenge to the Leonine papacy. How he handles it will set the tone for many years. I actually think how he deals with Germany is going to set the tone for many years. If he allows this to just continue the path it's been on for about almost a decade now, I think his papacy is pretty much over. Because if you allow this, to in terms of restoring the church over in that sense, allow this to go on, you're just saying anything goes. And essentially, we're going to turn into the Anglican communion, where it's just not a communion anymore. If you allow just sort of different groups to go their own way, like the German Synodal Way wants to do, apparently they're getting together all of the Anglicans who are outside of England are getting together to elect a anti archlayman of Canterbury. So the archlaywoman of Canterbury was installed by the English state, and it's interesting. There are more Anglicans outside of England than England because nobody in England believes in God anymore. Um, but they're actually more conservative and are opposed. I mean, even though it's sort of a joke because they're not even valid orders, but opposed to women's ordination, opposed to all this accepting of LGBTQ. A lot of them are from Africa, and so they're getting together in their group and electing an alternate, leader of their, what used to be called the Anglican, heretical church. I mean, that's the end game of this sort of Germany does its thing. You can have gay marriage in Germany and lay preachers there, but not in the United States. That's where it ends up. Essentially, the fractured nature that we're seeing unfold in the Anglican Church, and these liberals are blind to history, blind to what's going on, and they just want to rush the church headlong into it.
Before Pelican Plus, creators had to look for ad revenue from secular social media algorithms, which was an unpredictable way to raise a family. Now Pelican Plus sustains many families, including mine, through our Catholic business. This is only possible due to the support of the Founders Club members. If you're interested in helping save Catholic media and helping families like mine, become a Founders Club member today at pelicanplusfounders.club.
Yeah, this is something I think when this man was initially elected and if this was announced, something I saw from German media was that they were saying that this was he's sort of a pushover, that he's somebody who is a modernist and that was sort of just wants to appease everybody. I think this moving along of the process of trying to get lay preachers shows the flaw with this whole mentality of getting along just to get along, because the only people that lose in that are the conservatives. The only people that lose are those who decide to play the game while standing up for tradition. I think what this shows is that when you see people involved in trying to play the game, but also trying to be conservative, they end up losing. And this is what I would just caution people ahead of the society's consecrations, to just be aware of, because there's going to be I think there is going to be a tone shift, and it's certainly, I think, in the Vatican's mind of they're going to be dealing with the society, and I think they'll be dealing with the Germans and vice versa. Um, Based on how they're going to deal with the others, because and I think this has been interesting analysis from those who've been watching this, that how Pope Leo deals with the Society of Saint Pius X will be he's gonna have to have the German Snodal way in mind, because he's either going to be liberal or heavy-handed. What I am curious to see is if Pope Leo and his theological training, his Augustinian training, if that kicks in at all. Because if we are to believe that Pope Leo is on a slightly different trajectory from Pope Francis, that he does have a more rigorous theological background, and I think you can make a case that he does, then we should expect his sensus fidei to kick in, and it would be disgusted by some of these acts from the Germans, and treat the Society of Saint Pius X in a more lenient way. I suppose my overarching point is that how Pope if Pope Leo comes out with a overly generous, we're going to go along just to get along with the Society of St. Pius X, we should be aware that he might do the same thing with the Germans. And if that's the case, as you said, we end up in a sort of Anglican Communion GAFCON situation where we wouldn't be truly united in faith in a way that I think the Catholic Church should be. And that really only gets rectified through having real discussions about tradition, about where doctrine comes from, how dogma is, and contrary to these ideas that are clearly modernist coming out of the German synodal path, that ideas that dogma and doctrine change based on the belief of the people and how they elect certain ideas in each historical moment. So some stuff to keep an eye on. Indeed, disturbing things coming out of the German synodal path.
No, it's interesting on your last point. I have to admit, although I generally thought the letter of Dom Davide Pagliarani to Cardinal Fernandez was very well written and had some very good arguments in it. I have to say, I did pause over the end argument or the closing, which I understood, and I understood what he was doing when he essentially said, "Well, look, you and Francis," I'm paraphrasing, we're kind of go along to get along, and just anything goes, and just tolerate, don't use the law and tolerate." And I understand, one, it points out the hypocrisy, and two, I think he's really saying we have nothing in common theologically, and all we have is charity. I get it, but it did give me some heartburn, for the reason you say, that essentially if the sort of threatened, unjust, and would be invalid penalties are sort of withheld, if it's because it's like we're just gonna be the Anglicans, and if you guys wanna have your bishops and do your thing, that's fine. But, we're gonna have this so crazy circus over here. I mean, honestly, that is what Bishop Fillet was worried about in early 2000s. So we don't wanna just be in a zoo. We don't that was his expression. He said, "Decide we don't wanna just be put in a zoo. Oh, here's our traditionalists over here if they do their thing." And again, I'm not criticizing. I understand why he did it. I think overall it was a good letter, but there is a little danger to that tack of argument, to tack of saying, you know, treat us like everybody else and just tolerate us and let us get along because you're not cracking down on anyone else. And you point out that danger.
Yeah, and it's an unfortunate case in the church that I really do think that theological discussion, we reach such a devastating point with the Pope Francis pontificate that it's become almost morally impossible to have like groundbreaking. We're actually going to be discussing the council in a helpful way when it comes to the curia and the hierarchy, because they're dealing with this on a political level, which leads them to be to act in a different way with the society and the German synodal path. But fundamentally, we're not getting to the underlying problem, which is that there are disagreements on theology, on the faith itself. And until that's really just looked straight ahead in the face, and we realize that we are going to have to go back to the Second Vatican Council and discuss in what ways it is or is not in continuity with tradition, and in what ways what were modernist tendencies introduced into at least the hierarchy and the episcopate in the 1970s, we're just not going to be able to get anywhere. Fundamentally, what the Germans believe is different from what many other Catholics believe, and it cannot be this way. It cannot stand like that. And that's why standing up for the faith, going back and loving and adoring the God who has given us a revelation that does not change, even though it might develop, the substance that we're dealing with itself is something that has been given to us, and we have to protect it, we have to love it, and we have to make sure that that we're following it, that we understand it to the best of our capacities. So again, we'll have to see what goes on with the German synodal path. For all those watching, we certainly talk about that here a lot. We'll have some links in the description where you can read more on this as well.
Well, there you have kind of view of these two big stories. Both of them will be continuing stories. And thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed those you were watching on YouTube. And as we said in the beginning, there's just incredible content over at Pelican Plus. And it's more than just news and analysis, although there's a lot of that. There's prayers. I mean, there's hundreds of prayers. There's audiobooks. There's ebooks. It's really a one-stop shop for anything that you would want Catholic, and more to come. So, and there's no advertising. So if in the middle of this you got interrupted with an uncomfortable ad or something you don't really want to look at, none of that. There's zero advertising over at Pelican Plus because we're completely supported by our subscribers.
Yeah, definitely. So we thank all of our Founders Club members, all of our Pelican Premium members as well. May God grant you many joyful years, and we'll see you next week.